Graham's cereal hit the floor in a perfect arc just as the toaster started smoking. "Dad!" His 6-year-old son, Griffin, shouted, wide-eyed, frozen with his spoon halfway to his mouth. "I see it, buddy, I see it," Graham muttered, grabbing the dish towel and fanning the toaster like it owed him money. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, and somewhere under the chaos, his phone buzzed. It was his best friend, Marcus. "Just one line, speed dating. Tonight, you owe me," Graham groaned. He did owe Marcus. He'd bailed on helping him move last month. Still, speed dating. He hadn't been on a real date in years, not since Griffin's mom had left them. Between working double shifts at the auto shop and making it to every parent-teacher meeting, Graham barely had time to breathe, let alone flirt. But Marcus wouldn't let it go. "Just go," he said later that afternoon, handing Graham a clean shirt from the back of his car. "You need to laugh. You need to remember you're not just a dad." "Yeah, I am just a dad," Graham said, tugging on the shirt. "And I have exactly $30 to my name until Thursday. It's free. And if it sucks, we'll swing through that taco truck after." Graham sighed. "Fine. But I'm not taking any of this seriously." He didn't. Not at first. The event was held in the back of a cozy wine bar downtown, where tea lights flickered in mason jars and the smell of Pinot Grigio hung in the air. He sat through a woman who only talked about her cats, another who tried to sell him essential oils, and one who asked if he believed in past lives before he even said his name. He was halfway through a glass of cheap wine when she sat down. "Hi," she said, smiling. "I'm Elara." Her voice wasn't fake sweet like the rest. It was calm, warm, like someone who wasn't trying to impress anyone. "Graham," he said, straightening. She wore a simple white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a low ponytail. Something about her was effortlessly elegant, though she looked like she'd walked out of a lifestyle magazine by accident. But it was her eyes that caught him, gray, sharp, curious. "Are you actually enjoying this?" she asked, glancing around at the room full of awkward laughter and nervous sipping. He laughed. "Honestly, my buddy dragged me here. I'm just a dad who needed a break." Elara tilted her head. "A dad? Yeah, Griffin, he's 6, funny, obsessed with dinosaurs, and has more energy than caffeine. His mom's not in the picture." A pause, but Elara didn't flinch. "I like that you said that so clearly," she said. "Some men act like having a kid is a deal-breaker." "Well, he's my world," Graham said, shrugging. "Kind of a package deal." She smiled again, more to herself this time. "I like packages," he flushed. "That sounded better in your head, didn't it?" "Definitely," she said, laughing. Their 5-minute timer buzzed, but neither of them moved. "Want to skip the rest of these and just talk?" she asked. Graham blinked. "Seriously? I already met a guy who told me he'd been abducted by aliens. I think I've maxed out on excitement for the night." They found a booth near the back, away from the crowd. The conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years. She asked about Griffin, and he found himself talking about bedtime stories and how his son refused to eat green food. She told him she was in consulting, whatever that meant, but she kept the focus on him, asking about his job, how he handled everything alone, and what made him laugh. He didn't ask for her number. He figured someone like her wouldn't give it anyway. But she handed him a small card before she left. "This is real," she said. "Call me." He turned it over, just her name, Elara Vance. No job title, no company, just a number. The next morning, Graham dropped Griffin off at school and stared at the card on his dashboard. He called. She picked up on the second ring. "Hi," he said. "It's Graham from the speed dating thing." "I was hoping you'd call," she said. "Are you free tonight?" He wasn't. He had an oil change, laundry, and Griffin's science project due Monday, but he said, "Yeah." "I am." She told him to meet her at her restaurant called Larkspur. He showed up in his cleanest shirt and a jacket he hadn't worn in 2 years. The place was not what he expected. Chandeliers, a valet, and a host who looked at him like he'd walked in from the wrong side of town. "Elara Vance's guest," he said. The host's eyes changed instantly. "Of course, right this way." She was already seated at a private table in the corner, wearing a navy dress that made him forget how to breathe. "You clean up well," she said, standing to greet him with a kiss on the cheek. He sat, glancing around. "This place is over the top," she offered. "Yeah, I was gonna say fancy," she smiled. "I wanted to treat you." He looked at the menu, no prices, just words like truffle and seared. Elara, he said slowly, this place is insane. She waved it off. Don't worry about it. But he did. He worried the whole night until she reached across the table and touched his hand. Graham, she said softly, let me please. He stared at her. You're not. Just a consultant, are you? She hesitated, then pulled something from her bag and slid it across the table. It was a business card, but not like hers. This one said, Vance Industries, CEO Elara Vance. He blinked. Wait, she nodded. A millionaire, technically. But I don't like talking about it. People change when they know. He leaned back in his chair. So I went speed dating as a joke and ended up sitting across from the CEO of Vance Freaking Industries. She grinned. And I ended up sitting across from the most real man I've met in years. He shook his head, laughing breathlessly. This is insane. But is it good insane? She asked. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years something in him stirred, hope, warmth, possibility. Yeah, he said, it really is. The scent of sandalwood lingered in Graham's pickup long after he left Larkspur. He drove with the windows cracked, letting the cool night air slap some sense into him. Elara Vance, CEO. Probably used to flying private while he was still juggling overdue rent notices and trying to keep Griffin from outgrowing his sneakers every 2 weeks. He should have felt out of place. He should have said goodnight and never looked back. But when she'd looked at him across that table, her fingers still resting lightly on his, he hadn't felt small. He'd felt seen. The next morning, he was elbow deep in a transmission job when Marcus walked into the garage holding 2 coffees and looking smug. You're welcome, Marcus said, handing him one. Graham wiped his hands on a shop rag. You're impossible. She texted me this morning, said she had a remarkable time, her words, not mine. She texted you. You gave me as your emergency contact for that speed dating form, remember? She tracked me down through the organizer, said you didn't have her number. Graham blinked. She's resourceful. She's locked in, Marcus said, and clearly not scared off by the grease monkey thing. Graham took a long sip of coffee. You know anything about Vance Industries? Only that they bought out half the waterfront and funded that new tech incubator across town, Marcus said. Why? No reason. But it wasn't just curiosity, it was a creeping sense of imbalance. She lived in a world that operated on a different currency, one of power, polish, and privilege. He lived in a world of calloused hands and late-night budgeting. They didn't overlap. Not naturally. Still, when she called that night, he answered. I want to see you again, she said simply. He hesitated. I have Griffin tonight, no sitter. Then let me bring dinner to you. He hesitated again, but her tone wasn't tentative, it was certain, like she didn't see anything odd about wanting to eat takeout surrounded by toy dinosaurs and unfolded laundry. An hour later, she was at his front door holding 2 brown paper bags and a bottle of orange soda. Griffin answered first, peeking out from behind the door. Are you the fancy lady? Elara crouched to his level. I'm Elara, and I brought extra spring rolls. Griffin studied her like a scientist. Do you know how to do a raptor call? Not yet. He gave her a solemn nod. You'll learn. Dinner was eaten on the living room floor. Elara didn't flinch when Griffin dropped noodles on her skirt, or when Graham's dog barked through the entire episode of the cartoon. Griffin insisted on showing her. She laughed easily, listened intently, and asked Griffin real questions about his favorite books, what he wanted to be when he grew up, and if he thought jelly beans counted as vegetables if they were green. After Griffin was asleep, they sat on the porch with the remains of the orange soda between them. I don't think anyone's ever made me feel as welcome as he did, she said. He likes people who don't talk down to him, Graham said. You didn't pretend to care. You actually did. She looked out at the quiet street. I don't get to do this much, sit on porches, be around people who don't want anything from me. He leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. You really think I don't want anything? Do you? I want honesty, he said. And to not feel like I'm just some curiosity for you. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. I don't do casual, Graham. I don't have time for it, and I don't chase things unless they matter. He studied her face. Then why me? Because you're not impressed, she said. And that's rare. He didn't say anything right away. Then, you ever date someone not from your world before? No, she admitted. He nodded slowly. Then maybe we both need to decide if we're willing to learn a new one. She leaned in, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath. I already started. Their lips met, unhurried but certain, a kiss that didn't ask permission because it didn't need to. It didn't feel like a first, it felt like a decision. The next week unfolded like something out of a storybook Graham never thought he'd be part of. Elara texted in the morning, called at night, and showed up when she said she would. She invited him to lunch between his shifts, sent someone to fix the leaking pipe under his sink when she found out he couldn't get a plumber until next month, and left a note in Griffin's backpack that just said, "I hope your science project turns out amazing." Griffin beamed when he found it. But not everything came easy. When Elara invited Graham to a fundraiser gala for a children's literacy initiative she funded, he almost said no. He stood in front of his mirror, wearing the only suit he owned, adjusting the tie he hadn't worn since his cousin's wedding, and felt like someone trying to fit into a world sewn 2 sizes too big. "I can cancel," he said when she picked him up in a sleek black car that probably cost more than his house. "I don't want you to cancel," she said, eyes calm. "I want you to be exactly who you are." Nothing more. The gala was a different universe, champagne towers, marble floors, and people who wore their last names like armor, but Elara never left his side. She introduced him without apology, without sidestepping what he did or where he came from. "This is Graham," she'd say, smiling with quiet pride. "He's one of the best people I know," and somehow that was enough. Enough to carry him through the whispers behind glittering glasses and the polite dismissal from men who didn't ask him a single question. Afterward, as they stood outside waiting for the car, she leaned into him. "Still think we're too different?" He looked at her, the way her eyes softened when she glanced at him, like he was the only person on the street. "Yeah," he said. "But I don't think that has to be a bad thing." Her fingers found his. "Then let's keep proving it's not." He squeezed her hand. "One day you'll have to teach me how to do a raptor call," she laughed, and it sounded like something that might last. Graham didn't expect to be nervous around a 6-year-old, but watching Griffin tug at the sleeves of his sweater and pace the living room like a tiny executive made his palms sweat. "She's late," Griffin said, standing on tiptoes to peer through the front window. "She's 5 minutes late," Graham said, adjusting the collar of Griffin's shirt. "And she's bringing dessert, remember?" Griffin turned to him, eyes narrowed. "She said chocolate cake. If it's lemon, I'm not talking to her." Graham chuckled under his breath. "You're brutal." A knock at the door cut the moment short. Griffin sprinted to it and yanked it open. Elara stood there in wide-leg black trousers and a burnt orange blouse, hair swept up, holding a bakery box in one hand and a small wrapped package in the other. "Chocolate cake," she said before Griffin could speak, "and a surprise." Griffin took the box and disappeared toward the kitchen without a word. Graham stepped aside to let her in, and as she passed, he caught the subtle scent of jasmine and wood smoke. "What's the surprise?" he asked, hanging her coat. She handed him the package. "For you, not him." He peeled back the paper, revealing a leather-bound notebook, embossed with his initials in the corner. "I know you said you used to sketch when you had time," she said. "Thought maybe this would bring it back." He stared at the gift, throat tight. "I didn't think you remembered that." "I remember everything you say," she answered, brushing his forearm with her fingers. "Even the things you say quietly." Griffin returned, mouth already ringed with frosting. "Can we watch that dinosaur movie again?" Graham looked at Elara. "You in?" "I was born ready." They made a nest of blankets on the floor, and Elara didn't flinch when Griffin leaned against her halfway through, his head heavy on her shoulder. Graham watched them from the couch, his chest full of something that felt too big to name. After Griffin fell asleep mid-scene, Graham carried him to bed. When he returned, Elara was folding blankets, the room dimmed to a soft glow. "He trusts you," Graham said quietly, standing in the doorway. "I don't take that lightly." He moved closer. "You're not just good with him, you make this feel easy, like this could actually work." She looked up at him, eyes unreadable. "I want it to work." He reached for her hand, but she didn't take it. Instead, she stepped back. "There's something I need you to know." His stomach tightened. "What is it?" "My father's coming into town." He blinked. "Okay, he's difficult, controlling. He doesn't believe in distractions. especially not ones that don't fit his image of what I should be. Graham crossed his arms. Let me guess. Grease under the fingernails doesn't exactly scream future son-in-law to him. She flinched. It's not about what you do, it's about what he can't control, and I've never introduced him to someone who challenged that. Graham's voice dropped. So where do I fit in? She stepped forward again, slower this time, her eyes steady on his. I want you to meet him, not as someone I'm hiding, as the man I'm seeing, but I won't lie, he'll push, hard. Graham gave her a long look. I've been pushed harder by life than any man in a tailored suit. Bring it on, she smiled, soft and quiet. You don't know what that means to me. The following Saturday, Graham stood in front of the Vance estate in a charcoal suit loaned from Marcus, clutching Griffin's hand. The mansion loomed like a marble cathedral, all columns and glass, with a circular driveway that wrapped around a fountain taller than his truck. You sure I shouldn't have left him with my neighbor? Graham asked under his breath. Elara, waiting at the top of the steps in a navy coat, leaned down to Griffin. I'm glad you're here. Griffin looked up at the house like it might eat him. Do rich people have snacks? She laughed. The best ones. Inside, everything gleamed. A butler took their coats. A chef passed by with a tray of amuse-bouches. Elara led them into a sitting room where a man in a slate-gray suit stood near the fireplace, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. Dad, she said, this is Graham, and this is Griffin. The man turned. His eyes were sharp, his mouth a rigid line. He looked at Graham like a stain on imported fabric. You work with your hands, he said. It wasn't a question. I do, Graham replied, and I built my life with them. Elara's father let out a hum of disapproval and turned to Elara. We'll speak later. No, she said, her voice firm. We'll speak now. Griffin, sensing the tension, tugged at Graham's sleeve. Can I go see the backyard? Sure, bud, Graham said. Don't go far. As soon as he disappeared, Elara stepped closer to her father. I'm not asking for your approval, I'm informing you Graham's part of my life. And if you can't respect that, you're the one missing out. Her father's eyes narrowed. You're risking everything. No, I'm claiming something that's mine. Graham stayed quiet, letting her speak. This was her battle, and she was wielding every word like a sword. After a long pause, her father set his glass down. He stays for dinner. Let's see what kind of man he really is. Dinner was tense. The table was long enough to seat 20, but Griffin sat close to Elara, and Graham sat between them, fielding questions that were less curiosity and more interrogation. What are your long-term goals? Her father asked, slicing into a fillet. Graham set his fork down. Making sure my son grows up with integrity, and that the woman I care about knows I'm not going anywhere. Elara's fingers brushed his under the table. Later that night, after Griffin was asleep in the guest room and her father had retired to his study, Elara led Graham to the rooftop terrace. You didn't flinch, she said. I've had worse interviews, he replied. She laughed, but it faded quickly. There's something else, she said, stepping to the edge. I've been offered a position in London. It's a 2-year expansion project. I'd be overseeing everything. It's massive. He went still. When? They need an answer by the end of next week. You'd leave. I don't know. That's the problem. I don't want to leave you or him, but I've worked my whole life to matter in places like that. He joined her at the railing, the city lights stretching below them. I can't ask you to give up your dream, he said. But what if my dream changed? She whispered. What if it's not just about boardrooms anymore? Graham turned to her. Then you tell me what we're building instead. She looked up at him, eyes full of things she hadn't said yet. I want to find out, she said. With you, he pulled her into his arms. Then let's build it. The rain showed up uninvited. It wasn't dramatic or romantic, just a cold, steady drizzle that turned the front yard into a mud pit and soaked through Graham's boots while he tried to wrestle a tarp over Griffin's half-finished science project volcano. Inside the house, Griffin stood at the window, watching with his arms crossed. Why can't we just bring it inside? He asked through the screen. Because it's still drying, Graham called back, pulling the tarp tighter. And it smells like glue and vinegar. You smell like glue and vinegar. Graham laughed under his breath, tying off the last corner before heading inside. The house smelled like burnt toast again. He'd forgotten to cancel the automatic toaster setting, but it was warm, and the sight of Griffin in socks sizes too big chasing the dog around the kitchen made it feel like home. And still, Elara hadn't called 4 days. No word. Not even a message through Marcus. He told himself it was because she needed space to think. She'd said she had a decision to make, and he didn't want to be the reason she rushed it. But the silence chipped away at him, each day carving out a little more doubt. That night, after Griffin was asleep, Graham sat at the kitchen table with the sketchbook she'd given him, the leather soft under his fingers. He hadn't drawn in years, not since before Griffin was born, but now he found himself tracing lines without thinking. Griffin's lopsided grin, the curve of the old oak in the backyard, the way Elara's hair always seemed to fall across her cheek when she turned toward the sun. He didn't realize how many pages he'd filled until the clock hit midnight. He flipped to a blank page and stared at it. Then he drew her hand in his. The next morning, a knock came just as he was pouring cereal. Griffin ran to the door before he could stop him, dragging it open with a shout. Elara, she was drenched, hair dripping, coat clinging to her frame, cheeks flushed. She looked nothing like the perfectly composed woman who'd stood in her father's marble foyer. She looked wrecked, and beautiful, and real. I didn't want to wait anymore, she said, her voice breathless. Graham stepped forward, heart pounding. You walked here. I drove halfway and got stuck behind a street closure. I ran the rest, he blinked. You could have waited for the rain to stop. No, she said, stepping into the entryway. I couldn't. Griffin tilted his head. You look like a wet squirrel. I probably smell like one too, she replied, pushing soaked strands of hair off her face. Graham reached for a towel and handed it to her. What changed? She met his eyes, holding his gaze without flinching. I told them no, the London project. I told them I'm staying, he barely breathed. You sure I'm not walking away from this, she said. From you, from everything we've started. I've spent my whole life building things that looked impressive but didn't feel like anything. This feels like everything. Graham didn't speak. Instead, he pulled her in, wrapped his arms around her soaked frame, and kissed her like he'd been holding his breath for days. Griffin groaned from the hallway. Ugh, adults are weird. That broke the tension. Elara laughed into Graham's chest, and he rested his chin on the top of her head, the wetness of her coat forgotten. Later that week, Graham found himself standing in the middle of a boutique he couldn't pronounce, staring at a glass display of cufflinks that probably cost more than his monthly paycheck. Are you sure this is necessary? He asked Elara, who was browsing nearby with Griffin holding her hand and pointing out anything that sparkled. You're coming with me to the Vance Foundation dinner, she said. You need something that fits the occasion. What's wrong with my suit? It fits like a sad memory, he exhaled. You know I can't afford any of this. I didn't ask you to, she said simply. I want to do this for you. He hesitated, then nodded once. Then I'll let you. The dinner was held at a historic hotel downtown, all gold accents and velvet drapes. But this time, Graham didn't feel like an outsider. He stood beside Elara, not behind her. He shook hands, made jokes, and watched as Griffin, dressed in a tiny three-piece suit, charmed half the room by explaining the science behind his volcano project with enthusiastic hand gestures and a mouthful of canapé. Elara's father approached them near the end of the evening. His gaze moved between Graham and Elara, unreadable. You've surprised me, he said to Graham. Graham raised an eyebrow. Good surprise or bad? Still deciding, the man said. Then, after a pause, but she's smiling again, and that matters. He walked away, and Elara turned to Graham. That's as close to approval as he's ever given anyone. I'll take it. They left the event early, hand in hand, Griffin asleep in the backseat of the car Elara's driver had waiting outside Graham's house. She didn't let go of his hand. I've been thinking, she said quietly. About what we're building. Yeah, I want to build it here, she said. With you, with him, he looked at her, really looked. Not as the CEO of a company he couldn't pronounce, not as the woman who could buy a boutique with a single phone call, but as the person who had chosen him. Who had run through rain to find him. Who had sat on the floor of his living room and eaten cake with his son like it was the best meal in the world. I want that, he said. Every part of it. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. It was a deed. To a property just outside of town. A fixer-upper farmhouse, 6 acres, a garden, a porch swing. I bought it yesterday, she said. It needs work, but I figured you'd know what to do with that. His throat closed up. You're serious. I want a place that's ours, she said. Not mine, not yours. Something we build from the ground up. He tucked the paper into his jacket, then reached for her hands. Then let's start tomorrow, she smiled, and for once it wasn't polished or poised, it was open. Honest, completely hers, and completely his. They kissed again, this time without rush or hesitation. Inside, Griffin stirred and mumbled in his sleep. The dog barked from somewhere down the hall, and the house creaked under the weight of a life that wasn't perfect, but was wholly, undeniably theirs. And finally, it felt like enough. Like more than enough. The farmhouse creaked like it had stories to tell. Graham ran a hand over the worn banister of the front steps as he watched the sun stretch across the overgrown fields. A wheelbarrow leaned against a lopsided shed, and the air smelled of earth and promise. Griffin was somewhere inside the house, elbow deep in a box of donated books from the town library. Elara stood beside a stack of paint cans, a pencil tucked behind her ear, flipping through color swatches like she was selecting a future. Graham stepped through the open doorway, the wooden floors bare and scuffed, the walls stripped but waiting. Elara looked up. You're quiet. I'm watching you pick out the color of forever, he said. There's no pressure or anything, she teased, holding up 2 cards. Slate or time, whichever one covers up crayon better. She laughed, then paused. Griffin said something this morning. Graham leaned against the doorway. Let me guess, something about aliens or why pancakes are better than waffles, Elara shook her head. He asked me if I was his stepmom now. Graham's breath caught. What did you say? I told him I hope to be, she said softly. Someday. He crossed the room slowly. You still sure about all this? I wake up thinking about you. I fall asleep thinking about him. I've never been more sure of anything. He reached for her hand. I was going to wait until the place was finished, until the baseboards were in and the garden wasn't a jungle. But that was just fear dressed up like patience. She furrowed her brow as he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a delicate ring, simple, with a single diamond, nothing flashy, but it gleamed as though it had waited its whole life for this moment. I've spent the last few years building a life for someone else. I forgot I could want something for myself too, Graham said. This thing we have, this messy, imperfect, beautiful thing, it's more than I ever thought I'd get. Will you marry me, Elara? She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just nodded once with a certainty that shook him. Yes, she said. Yes, I will. Griffin's voice rang out from the living room. Wait, are we having cake again? Elara laughed, slipping the ring onto her finger. We'll definitely have cake. The wedding wasn't a grand affair. It was held 3 months later, beneath the oak tree in the back field. The grass had been trimmed, the wildflowers left untouched. A string quartet played softly as neighbors, friends from the shop, and a few of Elara's closest staff filled mismatched chairs. Marcus stood beside Graham as his best man, while Griffin walked Elara down the makeshift aisle carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and dandelions he'd picked himself. Elara wore a dress that whispered instead of screamed simple silk. No train, no veil, just elegance in motion. Graham wore a navy suit, the same one she'd had tailored for that first gala. When they met at the altar, neither of them spoke at first. They just smiled like the rest of the world had gone still. The ceremony was short, vows spoken not from tradition, but from truth. When the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Graham leaned down, and Elara rose on her toes, and it wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise with breath behind it. Later, under strings of warm lights and laughter, Elara danced with Griffin while Graham watched from the porch. She twirled the boy like he weighed nothing, and his giggles echoed across the field. Marcus clapped along, holding a sparkler in one hand and a cupcake in the other. "Never thought I'd see the day," Marcus said, taking the spot next to Graham. "You, married to corporate royalty, living on a farm." Graham took a sip of cider. "Yeah, well, turns out royalty can wield a paint roller and cook a mean grilled cheese. She's good for you. She's good to us." Marcus nudged him. "You deserve that." As the night deepened, guests began to trickle out, waving goodbye with tired smiles and crumpled napkins. Griffin fell asleep in Elara's lap, his tie askew and frosting on his cheek. Graham lifted him gently, carried him inside, and tucked him into bed without waking him. By the time he returned to the porch, Elara had kicked off her shoes and was sitting on the swing, the hem of her dress brushing the floorboards. He joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "This is it," he said quietly. "The life we built." She leaned into him. "And it's just the start." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas and the creak of the swing, the stars above them sharp and endless. Months passed, and the house transformed. Graham built a new back deck with his own hands. Elara planted a vegetable garden with Griffin, who took it upon himself to name every tomato plant. Their days filled with laughter, scraped knees, late dinners, and slow mornings. Elara kept her company running, but from a satellite office in town, where she could be home by 4 and help with homework by 5. They hosted Sunday dinners for friends. Graham taught Griffin how to ride a bike. Elara started painting again in the sunroom they converted just for her. Every night, they fell asleep with the windows cracked open and the sound of crickets humming like a lullaby. One evening, as autumn rolled in and the firewood stacked high on the porch, Griffin came running in with a crumpled paper in his hand. "It's for school," he said, holding it out to Elara. "We had to draw our family." She unfolded it carefully. There were stick figures in front of a crooked house, one with glasses and spiky hair, one with a crown, and one holding what looked like a dinosaur. Above them, in big block letters, "My family." Graham leaned over her shoulder. "I like that you gave me muscles." "I went easy on you," Griffin replied. Elara kissed the top of his head, her hand resting over her heart. "You got it perfect." That night, as the fireplace crackled and Graham pulled a blanket over the three of them on the couch, Elara looked around the room at the framed sketches on the wall, the dog asleep at their feet. The boy snuggled between them and felt a peace settle so deep, it rooted. This was the life she never knew she wanted. This was the family she chose. And every moment going forward would be a love story they wrote together, one page, one laugh, one quiet, beautiful day at a time.